Hello and welcome to Read with Pride, a podcast focused on LGBTQIA+ literature brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Ocean Pride Committee.
Hello and welcome to another delightful edition of Read with Pride. My name's Frankie. I'm one of your intrepid co-hosts, and today, as always, we have
Lexi, your other co-host.
And coming to us straight out of the printing and graphics department, the only person in the room who understood the sports references in our book today, Brandon.
Hello, I'm Brandon, he, him. I'm from printing and graphics, and I love sports. I love basketball. My favorite team is the Milwaukee Bucks.
Woo!
Ooh.
All right, so today we're talking about Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Now, this book was selected mostly by you, Brandon.
Yes.
And it was with the goal of doing a book club episode for debut authors. Now, something I find really interesting about this book is while it is the author's first novel, it is not his first publication.
Yes.
And I think that definitely shines through. But can you please tell our wonderful listeners, what's this book about? Why'd you want to talk about it?
And what format did you read it in?
So I read it digitally.
Okay.
Though I tend to use an ebook reader that will, instead of using the audiobook, I will have a robot lady read the EPUB to me.
Oh, okay.
Which I tend to really like. I think it works
that's
for me.
interesting. Yeah. Do you pick her voice, like how it sounds?
You probably could, but I've never tried.
Okay.
I do like the way that it sounds by default. I was talking to someone in my department about this recently.
Yeah.
I like the way that it is very little inflection, which feels like how it reads when you're physically reading something, as opposed to the audiobook. But yeah, so that's how I read it.
Nice.
So this book is about an Iranian American named Cyrus, who has struggled with alcoholism and addiction, sort of coming to terms with all of that and growing as he tries to write a book about martyrs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Frankie, how did you read the book?
I also read the book digitally. I did not have the EPUB lady read to me.
Just your own?
Just my own phenomenal internal narrative. And I read it on a computer through Libby.
Nice.
And I found it to be what was I saying? I said earlier, like, a very interesting expose of the intensely mundane. The fact that this is definitely, like, literary fiction at some of its most quintessential. Like I said earlier, like, the author is a poet, and I think that definitely shines through in the character of Cyrus, as well as just the overall writing style of the book.
I've always been really impressed with poets who are transitioning over to fiction.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that their economy of words is so good because poetry is so evocative at its core that you have to pick your words very carefully to make people feel what you want to feel. And I think that this book does an excellent job at getting those feelings across.
It's so interesting you said that because usually, poetry is usually like a short form kind of thing. It's very limited. Every space, every word counts. So I think when it is translated into a novel, a lot of poets kind of fall into the, like, it's a little bit either difficult to kind of all get it out, or they just kind of go on and on.
Right, yeah.
So I do think that's something interesting to keep in mind because, I think the author actually did translate that really well.
Yeah, when I think about other poets who've been very good at transitioning, I think of, like, This Is How You Lose the Time War.
I love that one.
Just incredible prose, like, that's the sort of thing that I think about. But you're right. Sometimes they do have a tendency to go on and on.
Yeah.
And one of the two authors of This Is How You Lose the Time War, Amal El-Motar, just released a science fiction novella that I feel no shame plugging on this episode as well, which is called The River Has Roots, and has one of the most phenomenal magic systems that's all about language and grammar. And I think we should definitely talk about that at some point on another
future episode.
I would love to read that.
It's really good.
It sounds good. You're selling it.
Yeah.
Like it. Yeah.
But back to Martyr.
Yeah.
So Cyrus, our protagonist, is very much so down on his luck, and it seems like he's had just both a rough hand dealt to him in life and maybe not taken the most agency over his existence. His mother died in a plane crash or an attack on a plane that was ordered by the United States in the early 2000s, where 290 civilians were vaporized. His father took him from Iran to middle of America to take care of and clean up after factory farmed chickens, where he did that for some 20 years and then died.
Yeah.
And Cyrus has been kind of floating. He doesn't have much in the way of strong relationships. He has a job that I think is very interesting and I think does a very good job of setting up the tone of the rest of the book, where he pretends to be dying.
Yeah, and I think I like how you set that up. And I think something we don't talk about a lot is when your parents die young and you're kind of left untethered, like you're not like an orphan by like, the thoughts maybe that you would have, but like even more than that, what do you do when your parents are gone and you're unmoored, you're lost, you're in college or you're a young adult? It was very interesting to kind of add to the story. Like, yeah, he truly has no one.
I do like the way that ties into a lot of the stuff that's happening in the rest of the book too, where they mention relatively early on that in Iran, people who are orphans are treated very well because their parents were martyred or what have you.
Right.
And having that contrast to what it's like in America, and especially because,
different.
Exactly. And especially he even mentions at one point, like, a part of him felt, almost good about it because he, he was like, I'm taking time off of school, like, it is convenient for me to be able to do this. And so I think that those things tie together really interestingly.
So when we first really meet Cyrus, he's at work as an actor working with medical students, pretending to be different terminal cases or the loved ones of people who are about to die. And his whole job is basically to get the residents used to breaking horrible, terrible news. I thought that this was really fascinating because when we start off this book, and there's very clear themes of like fascinations with death and legacy, that Cyrus's mother died in this plane attack, and what was left of her as a result, what's left of his father's life,
right? And just the way their deaths too were so opposite. Like his mom in such a big way that was like really unique and horrible and unfortunate. Just, the themes of death and martyrdom in here are very, very interesting with how they are so different.
I think it tied together its themes very well between this idea of when he's speaking to the medical students, he says that they're told not to use like euphemistic language.
Yeah.
But he himself thinks of death not as dying, but he says specifically like being of those who perish. So he has this very specific euphemistic idea of death, which leads to his perspective of
that's interesting.
Wanting to, care about martyrs and even potentially to be a martyr himself versus this, the way that his job is told him to handle it and why it's a good or bad thing.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And moving on to that, Cyrus is a struggling poet. I think probably similar to how the author may have felt at earlier points in his career as a starting poet, dealing with addiction. Cyrus talks about like struggling to write, how he talks a lot about writing, but doesn't actually do a lot of it. His close friends and loved ones do even like say like, hey, when's the last time you actually opened a pomegranate? And how many times have you wrote in a poem about opening up a pomegranate? I'm not calling you I'm not saying you're faking your culture, but do something. And so that eventually spurs Cyrus into action for the main conflict of the story, traveling from the Midwest to the Brooklyn Museum to see an Iranian performance artist who is putting her last days on public display.
She is living in the museum and allowing the patrons to come speak with her, sort of like the real-life exhibit, The Artist is Present, where she just will speak to patrons for as long as she can throughout the day and just stay in the museum until she passes away eventually. Her name is Orkida. As you said, she is Iranian, or at least in some way Middle Eastern, as far as Cyrus is aware at the beginning. And yeah, he finds her really fascinating and just wants to speak with her and talk to her about his book idea, and potentially put her in it.
Yeah. And she immediately takes an interest in Cyrus that makes a lot more sense later on in the book. She talks about how, oh, look at you, you're just another young Iranian boy obsessed with death. She takes a lot of his very romantic ideals about martyrdom and kind of turns them upside down, because here she is dying. Here is a young man with ostensibly his whole life ahead of him, and he seems intent on writing this book or ending his life.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, the idea of her in the museum and the exhibit and everything. As an aside, I was in Boston one time and I went to, I think it was there, and there was a living art exhibit of this woman who was going about her day, just in the museum though, in this space, and people kind of just sat there and watched, and it was no speaking, it was completely silent. She did nothing too exciting, just went about her day. She washed dishes and that stuff, and it was such an interesting experience just with what wasn't said. We're just, watching and observing somebody. And I really think it goes back, Frankie, to what you were saying too, with your quote about, the mundane, and how there is interest in something that can just be completely regular.
Yeah.
It was. And I think something interesting we had chatted about before we started was the idea that this book is super easy to put yourself in. I know you guys both had really interesting points about that.
I do like that this felt very personal to Kaveh Akbar, but also, I feel like Cyrus is very human in a lot of ways. But I also find that in a lot of ways it's really easy to sort of put yourself into the place of any protagonist who is similar to you in some ways and very different from you in other ways. I feel like it allows for a strong empathetic connection, where, I don't share Cyrus's culture or anything like that,
Sure.
but, I can understand his struggles, which I think is very, the emotional core of this book.
Mm-hmm. It's very human.
Yeah.
And even the format of the book itself, there are chapters that are news reports on the attack that killed Cyrus's mother. There are chapters that are dreams that Cyrus will imagine dialogues between different characters, fictional or people in his life.
They're poems from his
book. And eventually there are also chapters from the perspective of the artist Orkida.
There are also other characters too, there's a chapter from his best friend and roommate's perspective, his father's perspective, so it's very vignette styled in that way.
So I have to ask you guys, okay, so I listened to this book from Hoopla, audiobook, and I have to ask you guys, did you like that? Did you like the vignette style?
I'm a sucker for a vignette. I love that style.
Okay.
I love a funky little format.
Yeah.
I think it's a treat.
Oh,
I also think it's hard to pull off.
Okay, so before I kind of get into my stuff, Brendan, what did you think?
I did really like it. I found that it worked in this book largely because the characters existed outside of the context of these vignettes. Whereas I know a lot of vignette style can falter by way of it doesn't give the characters enough time. but most of the characters who
Yeah.
get spotlights in the vignettes are otherwhere in the story. It's Cyrus's father, his roommate, his mother. And so you get these little tidbits of more from them, but they do exist out elsewhere. So these are kind of more bonus pieces than
they're fully fleshed.
Yeah.
These aren't like
Nothing felt like a throwaway moment.
Right.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I have to say, so I listened to this book, like I said, and it, so they didn't announce the titles for the chapters. So I have to say, for quite a few chapters, I didn't know it was different perspectives.
That must have been incredibly confusing.
It sure was. It sure was. So if you listen to the audiobook, just be aware. And there really wasn't a lot of clear chapter breaks. It kind of just went right into the next one. So it was very confusing at first. So I think if I had read it, it might have been a little bit of a different setup and how I kind of felt the impact of that. But yeah, I listened to a lot of my books as opposed to reading them. And most books I'm like, oh, you can do either. It doesn't matter. This one I definitely would recommend reading in person, in the physical form.
Interesting.
I do think this book did an interesting thing, if I'm remembering correctly, where Cyrus's chapters were directly third person and other people were first person narratives, which I imagine was even more confusing when you're listening to it.
Much.
And the main character is being called by name and other people are saying I.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I was very confused. And then after a while, I caught on, and I was like, "Wait, what's happening in this?" And I read the title of the chapter, and I was like,
"Oh, I need to rewind and start again.
I need to redo."
I will say that Cyrus was not my favorite character in the book. My favorite character was Orchidea.
Yeah,
I really thought, and this is crazy that we're going to say this on a podcast about books. This is a spoiler for the book, my friends.
Oh, rare. This is rare.
I know. But Orchidea is revealed eventually to be Cyrus's mother. And that she did not, in fact, die in this plane explosion, but rather that prior to taking on the artist's name Orchidea, she was named Roya. And she had started a secret lesbian relationship with the wife of one of her husband's friends, Layla, back in Iran. And that is, one, super illegal, and two, was the first thing that seemed to really make her feel alive and like her own person.
Mm-hmm.
The plan was for Roya and Layla to sneak out and meet in Turkey and then eventually set up their own life somewhere else. And just by pure happenstance, Roya had Layla's papers, was able to get out of the country, and Layla died. Roya left behind her family. She did leave behind her son, and ended up building this really interesting career as a visual artist in the United States, where she was able to have this fabulous life, eventually finding another spouse who ends up connecting with Cyrus after she eventually does die, and reveals some of this history to Cyrus. There's an interesting circularity, I think, to the fact that both mother and son are queer, but it's not. While Roya's queerness was central to her need to get out of Iran,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Cyrus's queerness isn't. I felt like it wasn't a huge part of his identity.
I agree. Yeah.
But I also felt like he didn't have a very strong identity as a whole.
Sure.
It was very amorphous.
I thought, not that I think it was super integral to his identity, but I thought it was good as a way to sort of contrast these other pieces of him and his otherness that he felt within the United States. Like, I remember there was a scene early on with his sponsor, where they were talking about, like you said, the bit with the pomegranates and stuff like that. That was immediately then contrasted with a conversation where his he claimed to his sponsor, "I didn't think that you would know I was gay, like, given I'm straight passing." And his sponsor was like, "Oh, honey, you're not." No. And so that felt very, like, that line stood out to me just as, like, Cyrus, maybe doesn't super understand himself, but B, isn't as integrated as he might feel like he is.
Yes.
And you know what, though? I think it's interesting you said that, because I think for most people, especially when you're young, you're made up of so many different parts. Your identity is still being fleshed out. It makes sense that you're not all like one thing, or like, even a couple things. It's so much bigger than that. And I think that also made him seem more real as a character. It's not just a flat, this is a story about a queer man and his everyday life. Like, it's so much more than that. And I think, it's interesting. It's what makes people real. You're built up of so many different things.
Oh, yeah. I think I will amend my statement of, it's not that he doesn't have a strong... Okay. It's not that he doesn't have a strong identity. I think it's that Cyrus doesn't have a strong understanding of himself.
Yeah.
And that he's got a lot going on. He has these relationships with, like, his sponsor, his roommate, best friend, and sometimes lover Z.
Yeah.
That he builds this very strong connection with Orchidea, who ends up being his mother, and he does not know until far after. And those are the three primary relationships he really has in his life. And each of them revolves around a completely different facet of his existence. With Orchidea, it's his writing and his fascination with martyrdom, dying for a cause, believing in something so much that you would put down your life for it.
Mm-hmm.
With his sponsor, his relationship is very central to his struggles with addiction. His best friend and roommate, Z, sees him at his most frequent worst and is completely in love with him, and seems to frequently be ignored and shoved aside, and has all these bids for connection just dismissed repeatedly, because Cyrus is so wrapped up in his writing and his great tragic idea of himself.
I also really liked Orchidea, but I will say I think Z probably was my favorite character in the book for a lot of the reasons that you said. He felt very... I know that a lot of times it's very strange to have a character that exists to... I'm the one who cares about our protagonist. I live for this person. But it felt very real in Z's case.
Not self-serving.
It felt very much like I could understand the connection that they had and why they were close. And it felt like Z just, all he wanted was for Cyrus to get better.
Yeah.
And he is very much in love with Cyrus for a lot of the book, but he's also happy to continue the relationship that they have.
Friend.
Yeah. And I really appreciated him for that.
He was a very good character.
Do you have new or slightly used prom dresses in good condition? Or do you know someone who wants to give away a prom dress? Starting January 2nd, the Ocean County Library invites you to donate your dresses during the annual prom dress collection. Donated dresses will be collected at all of the Ocean County Library branches until February 26th and will be available for free for students in 8th through 12th grade starting in March at our prom dress giveaways. Before you donate, please ensure that your dresses meet the following criteria: short or long styles from the last 5 years, gently used and clean dresses ready for attending prom. Please do not donate dresses with rips, tears, or stains. Also, please do not donate accessories, shoes, or purses. For more details, check out our website at theoceancountylibrary.org. Visit your local branch or call us at 732-349-6200. We thank you in advance for your donation.
So I have to ask you guys, so a couple of the questions we've kind of danced around and topics were also borrowed from the Brooklyn Public Library's book club. Ooh. Shout out to them. So I was reading through their questions, and there was one that was really interesting to me that I kind of want us to discuss a little bit about. So the direct question is, in an interview with NPR, Akbar said, "Art is a mechanism by which people have sought immortality for millennia." Do you agree with this statement, and how does this relate to Cyrus's journey?
I think that's definitely true. There are a lot of people who, all they want out of their life is to make their mark on the world. A lot of people do that through their art, whether it's novelists or painters or what have you. And I think that is the underlying idea of kind of everything that Cyrus is doing, and his idea of, I want to not only raise up these martyrs, but potentially become one myself after I've finished this book. This is the way that I'm going to do that, this thing that I'm putting out into the world. So I think that it is integral to Cyrus's idea of the world, is that that's how he wants to put his mark on it.
I would say, I do agree that is definitely one of the primary motivations that people make art, is for it to be seen.
Yes.
But there's also the art that, maybe just hangs up in your bedroom wall, or the poems that you write in your journal that no one ever sees.
Yeah.
And that connects to a different quote I found from the author in actually discussing his sobriety and his experience with connecting to poetry on his journey to sobriety, which said, "Early in recovery, it was as if I'd wake up and ask, how do I not accidentally kill myself for the next hour? And poetry, more often than not, was the answer to that." And so I think that not only is art and poetry and this kind of mode of creation something by which to leave your mark, it is something that you can put yourself into.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter always who gets to see whatever you end up making. You got to make something.
Yeah, you're sharing and getting out a piece of your soul and who you are, and it doesn't really matter if people don't get it or like it or see it, I think, so I like to write, and I think it's really helpful to think, like, who cares if no one ever sees this? Who cares if people don't like it? Like, it's not for them, it's for you. And I think that it's interesting with poetry, because poetry is so emotional and so, deep, and it's a lot of stuff that you can't always get out, but you can get it out kind of in a few words or short verses or whatever. And I think that it's interesting. The author is originally a poet, talks about sobriety, talks about all of these different things, and then went on to write this full-length novel. It's very interesting.
I will say, to your point about writing and it doesn't matter if anyone ever sees it. I know a lot of people take the idea of, I don't even want to talk about it until it's ready to go. Yeah. Because for a lot of people, that is like, talking about it kind of kills it in some way.
Yes. I have a friend who wrote a book, told no one she was doing it, and then when it was done, she said it was done, and then said no one could read it. Mm-hmm. And we were all like, well, why would you mention this? And then she explained, because I did this for me. I wanted to note the accomplishment, like I did this hard thing, but ultimately it's for me. Eventually I might let you guys read it, but like, that wasn't the point. The point was for me to explore this part of myself and to be able to get my thoughts and feelings down on page. It was very interesting.
I think that's there are very different kinds of artists in life, for sure.
Yes.
As much as there are people out there who do seek immortality from their art, there are also a lot of people for whom it is very introspective. I think that is also kind of a dichotomy that exists in this book as well, especially as we talk about, like, in the early pages, there are these characters that Cyrus knows from the open mics and whatnot, like Sad James, who just and he's the one who originally pitches the idea of going to meet Orchido, which is funny. Characters who just seem happy to do what they want to do. He makes this weird, sad electronic music and plays it at open mics, and that's his thing. He's happy doing that.
And I love that. I mean, so there's this, and I can't remember who said it, but there's this quote basically that says, people who do artists, are either trying to do a painting or look in a mirror. So you're either trying to like look at yourself and do something that's extremely like transient or just important in the moment, and other people who, do it to be immortal or to, make a message, get a statement out there. It's very interesting, I think, the different types of artists. And I don't know, I really do love poetry and the poet aspect of the author. I think there's something to be said for poetry and how it relates to instant gratification, and kind of how like it's something that you obviously can like pour your heart out and stress over and like really give yourself to, but it's so much more, the message can be so much more instantaneous, I think, than reading a full-length book. But I think it can also make you think, I don't know, maybe this is just my personal experience, makes you think kind of about it longer than a book you might have read. Maybe that's just me, though.
It is interesting. I was going to ask, what is it about poetry that really takes you? Because I've never been a huge fan of poetry.
Yeah.
I respect poetry a lot.
Yeah.
But there's something about it that just doesn't sit with me, like, because it is so personal to the author.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I can get that as a reader. I can say, I understand that this is personal to you, and you're using this evocative language very skillfully, and I get that. But do I enjoy the act of reading this is very different.
And I think that's a lot of people's experience. I think a lot of people like things that they can put themselves into and are drawn towards that. And characters like Cyrus, where maybe you're not the exact, same person as him, but you definitely can relate to the big parts of his life, and that's why it's enjoyable. For me, I like poetry because, and maybe that's like the difference with how I like to read, is I don't necessarily want to seek out people like myself or characters like me. I like to seek out different things, like what makes you different or unique. It helps me understand a more well-rounded picture of where people are coming from. And for me, I love poetry because I can relate to deep, dark, personal things, but it's helpful for me to see other people's versions of that. And plus, besides the fact that I think just my attention and my, intensity, I like the short burst of like a poem as opposed to like, committing to like 200 plus pages. Right.
Yeah. I am a big poetry fan,
Yes.
but I got into poetry by way of like spoken word
I love spoken
and
word.
Slam poetry.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a big slam poetry nerd in high school.
Oh, I love it.
It was appropriately insufferable, I think. But I also do think that poetry definitely benefits a lot from being read aloud instead of read from a page.
Yeah. That's interesting. I do think poetry is much more shareable than, you can read quotes from a book and they're interesting, they're impactful, but I think because poetry, you can say the whole piece, you see that as a whole.
It also, this is a personal soapbox of mine actually, which is that a lot of people poetry is hard to teach. And so a lot of people have a bad experience in like middle school or high school with an English teacher who maybe just doesn't know how to connect with the student over the poetry, or they pick the wrong poem, or something was just off that day, and poetry has all of these technical aspects to it that you're then drilled on to try to be like, how do you find the meter? What's the rhyme scheme? Is this a sonnet? Is this what have you? And then poetry can then become stressful. Yes. And I think coming to poetry as an adult, there's no test. You can just read it and say, I didn't get it, and move on, or you can be like, wow, that's really beautiful, and I'm going to let that sit with me. And again, there's no test.
I like that a lot because so I think a lot of people, especially if you are kind of on the fringe or if you are different or weird in some way, highly relate to like your English teacher. Like you bonded to your English teacher. And if you had a terrible one, shouting out to Mrs. Miller. No, I'm just kidding.
You can't do that, Lexi.
It's okay. She's not going to listen. It kind of can stunt you or ruin some of your impressions, because you're right. Like, I think people get stuck in the idea that poetry needs to rhyme. It needs to be extremely colorful in the language or a certain way, and they get turned off from trying it. And it's a completely different experience as an adult, and you can pick what you want, write how you want. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's very dependent on who you are exposed to when you're young.
So did any of the poems in the book really stand out to you? Is there any that you could think of that you...
I really enjoyed all of the poems from the draft of Martyr. Those were the points where I actually felt the most sympathetic towards Cyrus as a character, because within poetry you have to put so much of yourself into it for it to be resonant, and it was very clear to me that Cyrus cares a lot more than he lets on.
Yeah.
That he feels these things very deeply. He has a tremendous sense, I think, of survivor's guilt, that his mother died, that his dad did just die after a very unremarkable and short lives. And he's supposed to do something. He's been published before, and everyone's waiting for him to have this grand, insight into the world. All right, poet boy, tell me the great truths of the universe. But he just cares about finding a reason to be alive, to find a reason of why he is still here when these other people aren't. Did you have a favorite poem?
I had two that really stood out to me. One that wasn't in the text and was more conceptual that I just really liked. Where Cyrus in one of the open mics at the beginning, he says he took words and assigned them to the numbers in the Fibonacci sequence.
Yes.
And he said in the text, like, it was a bad poem, but like that is so cool to me. It is so fun and evocative.
That's so open mic coded.
I love it. I loved that idea.
Yeah.
But of the like interstitial poems, the one that stood out to me the most was the one about Orchida. It was deeply personal from Cyrus's perspective. And it felt the most, attainable to the average reader, in part because we have this knowledge of who Orchida is and what she's done, like through the context of the book, versus the other ones, like the Joan of Arc one, which require a little bit more historical context. But I don't know, I just really loved the language that they used in that one.
So we've kind of talked a little bit about the non-linear fashion of this book. How do we feel about it? Do we like nonlinear writing? Do we hate it? Do we not care?
I like it when it's done well. I do think I like when authors take big risks with their books. I love an epistolary novel where everything's letters, or like sometimes you have like screenshots from things. I think that interesting formats, messing around with the timeline, can be very rewarding.
Did this pay off?
I think so.
Okay.
I want to say yes.
Okay.
I definitely felt like disoriented.
Yes.
As I was reading it, and I think that added to the overall experience of the novel. I definitely felt like this wasn't a book where I was supposed to be comfortable. That we have characters grappling with very big questions in this very, transient point in their lives, and to kind of go back and forth, continent to continent, timeline to timeline. I felt scattered in the same way that I felt that Cyrus was scattered in a similar way.
Yes, I agree. I felt very similar to that, where I'm not a huge fan of nonlinear writing, but if it is done well, I think that it definitely adds to its story. Just the way my brain works. Because I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, going back and forth in timeline is a little bit tricky for my brain. But yeah, no, I like what you said. Brandon, how do you feel?
I really liked it in this book. I thought it made a lot of sense because of just everything that was going on.
Yeah.
The Cyrus parts are all linear.
Yes.
And it's just the other stuff that I feel is more interstitial, that seemed to work very well, because it was just providing backstory for, again, characters that we've already met and things that we've already seen. Yeah. Along with, I felt like in a lot of ways, those backstories were doing a lot of lifting for the twist at the end. For example, one of the first chapters that involves a narrator that isn't Cyrus is one that is from the perspective of Layla, that is written in such a way that you're supposed to believe that it's written from the perspective of Roya, as she's on the plane heading to, I think it's the US, before it explodes.
Yes.
And there's also an early chapter where it's talking about Roya, and it says something along the lines of like, later in her life, a lover described her nose as Hellenic, which is very much a throwaway line until you think about, well, later in life she died when she only had one lover.
Right.
So it does foreshadow that in this very throwaway line.
Yeah.
And so I thought that the non-linearity of the novel led to its twist feeling more satisfying.
Yes.
Yes, that's true.
And I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I totally get that. It definitely made it seem like it worked more than just kind of like, bam, here's this twist, surprise. Yeah, I definitely get that. So like, looking more about what we were reading, kind of the feeling, our experiences, who do we think the audience is for this book? Who would you guys say?
I think that the audience needs to be someone who's down with getting a little weird. I think that's really important.
How about you get down with being weird and explain that a little bit?
What does it mean to get down with being a little weird? I think that the ideal reader for this book is someone who is open to a book that requires some amount of investment in your time.
Yeah.
And emotional investment.
Yeah.
That you need to be okay with characters that aren't necessarily likable. I think that it benefits you to have an understanding of U.S. military history from 1980 to the present day, because I'm a big history nerd, and I do think my knowledge helped, and interest in like international affairs gave my reading experience more texture.
Yeah.
I also love New York localized media, and I've spent a lot of time in the Brooklyn Museum and love art, and I think that helps me get more excited about the time in the museum during the exhibit, and also when we learned more about Roya's life in New York as she became an artist. I felt like I was able to become more invested in
You had a lot more buy-in because
yeah.
That's interesting because I don't have that military background of information, and I definitely think that impacted things, as well as just kind of like the whole I guess that really is that background that added another layer that I did not have, and I think that probably would have made this story more rich if I did. Brandon, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think I might be in between you two in terms of the level of knowledge that I had, and I think that it served me pretty well because I think that it doesn't hold your hand, but it also doesn't just drop things on you and expect you to already know.
Yeah.
And so I think that it does a good job with providing enough historical context along with cultural context for the life of his Iranian parents, that I think that you can go in without that knowledge and come and walk away with something, that it isn't necessary.
Yeah, I get that. Who do you think who's the audience that you would say this book is for?
I think people, everything that Frank said, but also people who are sort of looking for direction in life.
Yes, definitely.
I think that this is a good book for anyone who is sort of questioning their place in the world, for anyone who is feeling, the book says, the big pathological sad.
Yes, the big sad.
I think that anyone who's feeling those kinds of things might find something worthwhile for them in this book.
Definitely. That kind of hits it right on the head. At least for me too. I think reading this book, it really speaks a lot, I think, to addiction, and I think to the author's experiences. I think that if you have had any experience with substance use or alcoholism in whatever fashion, you very much get this book.
Yeah,
and
you'll see yourself in it.
Yes, and that lost feeling, the vagueness of existence. I think that when I was reading this, I kept thinking this would be a great book to read in college. Like if you're a freshman in like some gen lit class, I think that this would be a great opener. Like I think it's interesting and like contemporary enough where, you know, kids would see themselves in it, especially because when you're 18, you don't have a great idea of who you are. Like you kind of do, but like you're still figuring things out. And even if you thought you knew who you were, a lot of people go to college and you're like, wait a minute, that might not be totally accurate anymore. But yes, I definitely thought that this would be a good read for college.
Yeah. All right. And last question actually today is, hey, Brandon.
Yes.
You said that you really wanted to talk about this book because it is one of your favorite books, if not your favorite book ever. Why do you love this book so much?
I think some books just come to you at the right time, and this book absolutely did for me. Like I said, for anyone who's feeling a little bit directionless, a little bit the big pathological sad, this book can really hit you in those ways, and it absolutely did for me when I read it. But also, I think looking at it from a analytical perspective, I think it just is so expertly written at doing exactly what it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying previously, I think before we started, that a lot of the pieces of this book line up so well together that they can really only be about, this book only could have been written in this way by this person with these characters and all of that.
Yes.
It all really, really lines up. Even down to like Cyrus's job, which we see him at once, just lines up so well with everything the book is trying to say and do. It just feels so deftly handled. All of these individual pieces, especially at the beginning, like in a lot of literary fiction, where you're focused a little bit less on plot and more about an idea, you need to set up and knock down your themes very skillfully. And that involves a lot of like throwing something to your readers to think about in the early pages, and not necessarily telling them this is the big idea, but paying that off later anyway. And I think that this book does a lot of that in contrasting its ideas and themes relatively early on, like in the previous scene that I talked about with the pomegranates versus the sexuality thing.
Yeah.
Like those two are very, very much tied into this idea of identity, and those scenes are right next to each other. And the idea of like Cyrus's father working on this chicken farm, and in another scene that is right near it, they talk about how like people would go fight for the chicken eggs just so that they can have chickens. And he goes from that culture to now they're all around him, and he has to clean up after them, and it's a miserable life and whatever.
Excess.
And so I think that it just does such a good job of like setting up and knocking down those ideas, even just right next to each other, by making you think. And it really lands emotionally, I think, towards the end, especially as, you know, I think it's a book with a relatively hopeful outlook in spite of how bleak a lot of the text is.
Yeah, we have had a lot of big pathological sad conversation, but I definitely want to agree and echo that, like, the book ends on a note of, like, life's hard, you can do hard things.
Yeah.
And doesn't matter how hopeless you may have started out, things do get better.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to try.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brandon, for being on our podcast today.
Yeah.
All right. So until the next episode, this is Read with Pride with your co-hosts, Lexi and
Frank.
And today's guest, Brandon.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to visit the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events. All the titles mentioned in today's episode can be found throughout the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.